Um, okay, something shifted in them and they haven't told you yet. Mm. So, before anything else, breathe. Not the kind of breath you take between tasks, between thoughts, between the noise of everything competing for your attention. The other kind, the slow kind. The kind that arrives when something underneath the surface of your ordinary day has been asking, quietly and persistently, to be acknowledged. Let that breath happen, then stay. Ah, there is a particular moment in a person's interior life that has no name in any language, the moment when something they have been circling, approaching, and retreating from, examining from every safe distance available to them, finally becomes undeniable. Not because anything external changed, not because a sign arrived, or a conversation happened, or circumstances rearranged themselves into something more convenient, but because the internal resistance simply runs out quietly, without announcement, the way a tide turns not with drama, but with the unhurried certainty of something that was always going to happen, that was only ever a matter of when. Something like that may have happened recently. Not in you, or not only in you, in the space around a situation you have been living inside of, perhaps longer than you've admitted to yourself. Let me tell you what readiness actually looks like. Not the performed version, not the version people announce when they want to seem evolved or available or appropriately mature about something they're still privately terrified of. Real readiness, the kind that arrives without a speech attached, the kind that shows up in the texture of small decisions, in the way someone begins to move differently through their own life, orienting themselves almost imperceptibly towards something they have decided to stop running from. It doesn't look like certainty. It looks more often like the particular stillness of a person who has finally stopped arguing with themselves, who has let the verdict arrive, who is living for the first time in a long time in alignment with something they actually want rather than something they've convinced themselves they should want. And that stillness, that specific loaded quality of a person who has made a decision in the private court of their own interior, has a way of transmitting itself not through words, not through any direct declaration, through something subtler than that, through the quality of presence, through the way attention is given, through the particular texture of a dynamic that has begun without either person formally acknowledging it to move in a new direction. This reflection invites you to consider: have you felt recently a shift in the quality of something you'd grown accustomed to, a change in temperature, a new weight in a familiar silence, a sense that something which had been standing still has quietly, without warning, begun to move? Because shifts like that are felt before they are understood. They arrive in the body first, in a subtle change of atmosphere around a situation, in the way something that felt finished begins to feel, against all reasonable expectation, unfinished, in the particular discomfort of something reopening that you had carefully, deliberately, and at some personal cost closed. Picture a house in winter, every window sealed, every draft accounted for, the interior arranged into something manageable, something livable, something that no longer requires the kind of vigilance that open windows demand. And then, without permission, without warning, a warmth begins to press in from somewhere outside the sealed perimeter. Not violently, not with the force of something that intends to disrupt, with the patient, unhurried certainty of something that knows it will eventually find its way through, because warmth always finds its way through, because no seal is ever quite as complete as it appears from the inside. Some of you have been the sealed house, not out of coldness, out of intelligence, out of the very reasonable self protection of a person who has learned through specific and credible experience that open windows in winter are expensive, that warmth, when it departs, leaves a cold that is somehow more penetrating than the cold that existed before it arrived. And so the windows were sealed and the interior was arranged. And a version of sufficiency was constructed that was genuinely, honestly sufficient until something began pressing in from outside the perimeter and sufficiency started to feel, once again, like a word for something considerably less than what is actually wanted. Uh, this reflection invites you to consider, where in your interior life have you been confusing sufficiency with contentment? And what has recently begun pressing against that confusion in a way that is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore? Now, the chase. I want to sit with that word because it deserves more than its casual usage. A chase in the context of something serious, something real, something that has moved past the territory of games and strategy and the calculated performance of indifference. A chase is not what it looks like from the outside. It is not the dramatic, cinematic pursuit of someone running toward another person with declarative momentum. It is quieter than that, more deliberate, more considered. It looks like a person beginning to close a distance they previously maintained, beginning to show up in ways that are slightly more present, slightly more intentional, slightly more oriented towards something specific than their previous behavior suggested they were capable of being. It looks like consistency appearing where inconsistency used to live, like attention that doesn't flicker or fluctuate with the unpredictable rhythm of someone managing their own feelings from a safe distance, like the particular quality of someone who has decided quietly, privately, without making an announcement of the decision that they are done with the distance, that whatever the distance was protecting them from is less frightening than the alternative. That the alternative, which is this, which is you, which is the specific and irreplaceable presence of someone they have been circling without fully committing to, is worth the vulnerability that closing the distance requires. This reflection invites you to consider, what would it require of you, in the most honest and specific terms, to remain open to being pursued by something serious, to allow the chase without either retreating from it out of self protection or collapsing into it out of relief that someone has finally decided to move? Because both of those responses are understandable. The retreat, the instinct to create distance in the exact moment someone begins to close it, is the perfectly logical reflex of a person who has been here before, who knows what it feels like when a chase loses momentum, who has learned to protect the interior from the particular kind of devastation that arrives when something that moved toward you stops moving. And the collapse, the overwhelming relief of being chosen finally, seriously, by something that felt for a long time like it might never fully commit, is equally human, equally understandable, and equally worth examining before you allow it to make decisions on your behalf. What serves you here is neither retreat nor collapse. What serves you is the particular steadiness of a person who can be pursued without losing themselves in the being pursued. Who can receive the chase with open hands rather than clenched fists or outstretched arms, present, attentive, genuinely available, and simultaneously grounded enough in their own worth to allow the pace of this to be what it actually is, rather than what impatience or fear would prefer it to be. Because something serious, the real thing, the kind that builds rather than consumes, the kind that asks for presence rather than performance, moves at its own pace. It cannot be hurried into solidity. It cannot be slowed into safety. It simply unfolds with the particular intelligence of things that know what they are, in the time that it takes for two people to become genuinely, honestly available to each other, not the curated versions, not the armored versions, but the actual ones, with all their complexity and contradiction and quiet, persistent need to be known rather than simply wanted. This reflection invites you to consider, what does being genuinely available, not strategically available, not conditionally available, but actually fully, honestly available, look and feel like for you in the context of something that is beginning to move in a direction you may have stopped expecting it to move? Some of you watching this have been holding a version of hope at arm's length for long enough that the holding has started to feel like its own kind of normal. The careful management of wanting, the disciplined containment of expectation, the practiced art of not leaning too far in any direction, lest the direction change and the leaning become a fall. And there is wisdom in that management, real wisdom earned at real cost. But wisdom applied past its useful edge becomes its own limitation. And it's possible, genuinely possible, that the edge has been reached, that what is approaching now is not something to be managed, but something to be met fully, with everything you've learned and everything you still carry and everything you are in this specific, complicated, beautifully imperfect moment. The power is yours. It always has been. Not the power to determine what this becomes or to control the speed at which something serious finds its shape, but the power to decide how present you are willing to be for it, how open. How willing to let the chase be what it is, not a game, not a test, not a performance of desire designed to manage your response, but the genuine, slightly awkward, entirely human movement of someone who has decided finally and seriously that you are worth the vulnerability of moving toward. They're ready for something serious. Expect a chase, not eventually already, in the quiet reorientation happening in the interior life of someone who has finished arguing with themselves about what they want and has arrived without ceremony at an answer that has your name in it. Trust yourself with this. The version of you that knows the difference between someone who is playing and someone who has decided that version has been right before. Let it guide you now through whatever this is becoming, at whatever pace it chooses to become it. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. What does it feel like, in the most specific and honest terms you can find, to sense that someone has shifted from circling to actually moving toward you? And what is the one thing you need to feel? Not hear, but genuinely feel, before you allow yourself to believe that this time the seriousness is real. Drop it below. I read every single one, without exception, and this space holds all of it. See you in the next one, and listen. Someone deciding they're ready for something serious with you is not a small event. Even when it arrives quietly, even when it looks from the outside like nothing has changed, something has changed. And the part of you that felt it first was right. Take care.